Hey guys, how's it going? Today we are going to tackle an oft-requested part of history, but not quite in the way I imagine most people want. Today we are going to Rome and the rule of Emperor Nero, though we won't be talking about Nero himself. Today I am more interested in the royal poisoner of the ancient Roman court, Lady Locusta of Gaul, described as one of the world's first recorded serial killers. For now, let's dive headfirst into the poisonous trail of Locusta's tale. As her name and title suggest, Locusta of Gaul was from Gaul, which is modern-day Western Europe, including the countries of France, Germany, the Netherlands, parts of Switzerland, Italy, and a few others. It was a very broad term for a very wide area. Where exactly in Gaul Locusta came from is up to debate, as well as much of what her early life was like. We are able to postulate some parts of it, though. What we know is that Locusta was an expert in botany. She was adept at both finding and utilizing herbs for medicinal and, shall we say, more proactive purposes. Her abilities as a poisoner are not really talked about before her capture, but the ability to identify what will and won't kill you means that you can use that knowledge in both ways. At some point, she was approached by the Romans and either went along to Rome or was captured and taken there for her wealth of knowledge in the year 54 AD. And here's where the brackish waters get muddy. We don't really know what Locusta was up to between this capture and her eventual employment at the royal courts in that same year, but it is assumed that she made her way in Rome by selling her services as a poisoner. We make this assumption based on a matter of public record, that being her arrest and imprisonment for poisoning someone. In this less than a year span, though, she had acquired something of a reputation, catching the eye of Agrippina the Younger, the wife of Emperor Claudius. She took Locusta from prison with an offer to become the royal poisoner. Locusta happily agreed. The task given to her was a simple one. She was to murder the sitting emperor of Rome, Claudius. Agrippina had come to loathe her husband and wanted to make a path for her son, Nero Claudius, to become the emperor. As such, Agrippina formulated a plot with many other high-ranking court officials, turning many against the emperor. To accomplish her task, Locusta decided to poison Claudius's food either by sprinkling a poison powder over mushrooms or through the mushrooms themselves, which have been deduced to likely have been death caps. The plate was served to Claudius by his own food taster, Helotus, who was in on the plot. Claudius ate the mushrooms and fell ill but did not die. While the poison was effective to a degree, it was slow acting and as such caused a great deal of suffering. It's debated as to whether this was the poison that finished him off or if it was an additional dose administered by his doctor, Gaius Xenophon. If it was the latter, Xenophon would have stuck a feather down the emperor's throat to get him to vomit. But the feather itself was laced with a more fast-acting poison, leading to the emperor's death. Whether this poison was crafted by Locusta or a different party is completely unknown, but can be assumed. Now, something to extrapolate based on these two instances of poisonings that we know about is that Locusta seemed to favor slow poisons. Whether this was done because of product availability, a belief that it would make for a more convenient getaway because the person would die long after the poisoner had left, or simply because it was just her style is unknown. However, this slow-acting poison favoritism would get her into trouble time and again, and is likely how she was caught before her royal appointment. We will touch on this again later. Locusta was the one to take the fall for the assassination of Claudius, and thus wound up in prison once again in 55 AD, and once again her stay would be short-lived, this time receiving a pardon by the newly crowned Emperor Nero, who was in need of her expertise. See, Claudius had an heir with his third wife, and Nero was the son produced by his fourth. As such, this son, Britannicus, could very well challenge Nero for the throne. Nero, famously paranoid, wanted him out of the picture and advised Locusta to kill Britannicus swiftly but cautiously. This resulted in Locusta using arsenic, which was given to the boy but failed to work fast enough, either because the dosage was too small or for some other reason. Outraged, Nero personally flogged Locusta and threatened to have her executed. He then dragged her to a room and forced her to make a more effective poison, one that would kill the boy immediately, effectively contradicting Nero's original plan for caution. Nero himself supervised the construction of the poison to make sure that this one would work. To make sure of this, Nero used children as guinea pigs. This was then served to Britannicus at a dinner party surrounded by Nero and Britannicus's relatives, as well as other court officials. Britannicus was served a hot drink, which was tasted for poison beforehand and found to be clean. Given that the drink was too hot, he requested that some cool water be poured into it. The poison had been mixed into the water, and when the boy, only 13 years old at the time, drank it, he died immediately. For this act, Locusta was once again found guilty and thrown into prison, only to once again be pardoned by Nero, given an estate and servants so that she may practice her art with more ease, and eventually also being sent students to learn the art of poisoning. Locusta herself likely assists in the assassinations of other figures of the Roman courts, though these are significantly less well documented than the assassination of Britannicus. Supposedly, Nero carried a container of poison specifically crafted by Locusta in order to take his own life if the need ever arrived. For about a decade, Locusta was living the high life on a Roman estate. She received a stock of slaves, animals, and prisoners with which to experiment on, funded by Nero and the royal court. However, this all came to an end in 68 AD with the new emperor, Galba, did not share the late Nero's feelings about keeping a royal poisoner who had killed members of the aristocracy, and so ordered her, her estate, and her students to all be seized. Locusta was supposedly dragged through the streets of Rome screaming along with other Nero sympathizers clasped in chains, and then led to her death. In my research on this topic, I found a rumor that exists that Locusta's method of execution was a horrifically brutal one, where she was sexually assaulted by a giraffe trained in such a way. Far as I can tell, though, this is just a rumor, and she was most likely simply publicly executed with the rest of the so-called scum of Nero. This idea of her being raped to death by an animal is actually not an uncommon thing found with serial killers. Throughout the ages, many serial killers supposedly died due to sexually motivated injury. For example, it was widely believed that Jeffrey Dahmer died after jumping off of a fridge with a broomstick up his ass. In reality, he was bludgeoned to death with a dumbbell. If you think I'm making that up, it's because you're too young. Point being, take any case, ancient or otherwise, of a hated killer dying in a sexual act with a massive grain of salt. So this all leads to a very important question in regards to Locusta. Was she actually a serial killer? Locusta holds the reputation of being the world's oldest confirmed and documented serial killer. All of those extra titles are because a couple came out of China that have a dubious origin, as well as the wild amount of people who were serial killers that were never documented. There is a case for Locusta on both sides. Let's start with what classifies a serial killer. By law, a serial killer is a murderer that has killed more than 3 people over the course of a month or more. So on this definition alone, yes, she classifies as a serial killer. The main point of debate for her serial killer versus mass murderer seems to come from the motivation and the location. A mass murderer kills a bunch of people in one location, usually with a motive of some variety, while a serial killer usually kills in a number of locations, most often selecting and vetting out a target, but not always. The main motivation of male serial killers tends to be in a sexual nature, while the main motivation of female serial killers is usually money or authority. In this, Locusta fits the bill. Her position as a royal poisoner put her above the law in several occasions, as she was shielded by Nero, and her expenses more or less paid for themselves thanks to her occupation. Whether or not this was in fact her motivation is debatable, or if she killed as a way to get back at the Empire who kidnapped her, which would seem more likely. The counter-argument to be made is that if it is a person's job, does that make them a serial killer? This argument would hold weight normally, if not for the known fact that before she met Agrippina, Locusta had been in prison for poisoning someone. Again, motivations for the actions are speculative, but I believe the case gets closed that she was in fact a serial killer. But that is it. Locusta in the books. Let me know what you thought down in the comments. Do all the YouTube stuff. Check the links for my Discord, Twitch, and Twitter. But for now, guys, keep your chin up. Peace.